The sun burned mercilessly over Port Royal's harbour square, where the crowd had gathered like vultures circling carrion. Isabella's wrists ached against the iron shackles that bound her to the weathered whipping post, her fine silk dress, now torn and stained, hanging in tatters around her trembling frame. The harbour master's voice carried across the assembly, each word a blade twisting deeper into her already shattered dignity. Let it be known that Isabella Cortez, daughter of merchant Lord Eduardo Cortez, has borne a bastard child to Captain Marcus Bellingham of His Majesty's Royal Navy, who has denied all responsibility and declared her a liar and a whore. The crowd jeered, and Isabella closed her eyes against the burning tears. Her infant son had been torn from her arms only hours ago, taken to some convent where she would never see him again. The captain, the man who had whispered promises of love beneath Caribbean stars, who had held her as though she were precious, now stood on the governor's balcony. His face carved from stone, his silence more damning than any accusation. The first lash came without warning, splitting the fabric of her dress and the skin beneath. Isabella bit down on her scream, tasting blood. She would not give them the satisfaction. The second strike fell, then the third, each one echoing across the harbour like thunder. Her vision blurred with pain and humiliation as the jeering crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with righteous cruelty. Through the haze of agony, she heard the whispers, the respectable women clutching their pearls, the merchants who had once smiled at her father, now spitting at the mention of the Cortez name. Her father had disowned her the moment her condition became visible, choosing his reputation over his daughter. Now she had nothing. No family, no child, no future beyond whatever dark fate awaited fallen women in port cities. The executioner raised his arm for the 10th strike, when a voice cut through the chaos like a cutlass through sail canvas. Enough. The single word carried such absolute authority that even the executioner froze mid-swing. The crowd parted as a figure emerged from the shadows of the warehouses, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of a hunting cat. He wore a long coat of midnight blue, salt-stained and weathered, with leather boots that had walked 1,000 decks. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his face bore the marks of sun and sea and violence, a scar cutting across his left cheekbone, another disappearing into the collar of his shirt. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, storm-grey and utterly fearless. They swept across the crowd with such contempt that grown men took involuntary steps backward. "Captain Nathaniel Cross," the harbour master stammered, his hand instinctively moving to his sword. "This is a legal punishment. You have no authority. I have the authority of 30 guns and a crew that would burn this harbour to ash for my amusement," Nathaniel replied, his voice low and dangerous. He moved closer to the whipping post, his gaze finally settling on Isabella. Something flickered in those grey eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "This woman, what's her crime?" "She bore a bastard to—" "I asked what crime she committed under maritime law," Nathaniel interrupted, still watching Isabella. "Adultery, theft, treason." The harbour master sputtered. "She deceived a naval officer. So her crime is being deceived herself." Nathaniel's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. Fascinating how that works. He turned his attention back to the crowd, and several people actually fled. "I'm claiming this woman under the law of salvage. She's coming with me." "You cannot simply take—" the governor's representative began, but Nathaniel drew a pistol with such casual speed that the man's words died in his throat. "I've just returned from raiding 3 Spanish merchantmen," Nathaniel said conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "My hold is full of silver, spices, and enough gunpowder to level half this port. I'm in a generous mood today, which is why I'm offering to pay for damaged property." He tossed a small leather purse that landed at the harbour master's feet with a heavy clink. "That should cover it." The harbour master stared at the purse, then at the pirate captain, then at the crowd of sailors emerging from the shadows behind Nathaniel. All armed, all watching with the same predatory patience as their captain. "Take her," the harbour master finally muttered. Nathaniel holstered his pistol and moved to the whipping post. Isabella felt his presence like a storm front, overwhelming, dangerous, impossible to resist. He unlocked her shackles with a key he shouldn't have possessed, and she collapsed forward. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Can you walk?" His voice was closer now, quieter, meant only for her ears. Isabella tried to respond, but her throat had closed with pain and shock. She managed a small shake of her head. "Then I'll carry you." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with surprising gentleness. The crowd parted silently as he carried her through the harbour square, his crew falling into formation around them. Isabella's last coherent thought before darkness claimed her was that she had traded one captor for another. But as consciousness faded, she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, and somehow, impossibly, she felt safer than she had in months. Chapter 2. The Haven of Thieves. Isabella woke to the gentle rocking of a ship and the sound of waves against Hull. For a moment, she forgot everything, the whipping post, the crowd, her stolen child, and simply existed in the peaceful darkness of half-consciousness. Then memory crashed over her like a rogue wave, and she jerked upright with a gasp. Pain lanced through her back, and gentle hands pressed her shoulders, easing her down again. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. "You'll tear open the wounds I just finished stitching." Isabella's eyes adjusted to the lantern light. She lay in a cabin far nicer than she'd expected, not luxurious, but clean, with real glass windows showing a sunset-painted ocean. The woman tending her was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair tied back and the weathered hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime at sea. "I'm Mary," the woman said, applying a cool salve to Isabella's back. "Ship surgeon and the closest thing to civilization this crew has." "Where am I?" Isabella's voice came out as a rasp. "Aboard the Serpent's Revenge, Captain Cross's ship. We're 3 days out of Port Royal, heading for Tortuga." Mary's hands were gentle but efficient. "You've been fevered for most of it. The wounds weren't deep, but infection was setting in." 3 days. Isabella's mind reeled. Why did he take me? Mary paused in her work, and something complicated crossed her face. "That's a question for the captain, not me. But I'll tell you this. Nathaniel Cross is a pirate, a killer, and a man who sent dozens to the bottom of the sea. He's also the only man I've ever known who would interrupt his own profitable raid to save a woman being whipped in the town square." She tied off a bandage. "Make of that what you will." A knock sounded at the door, and Mary called out permission to enter. A young sailor entered carrying a tray of food, bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a cup of watered wine. He set it on the small table, nodded respectfully, and departed without a word. "Eat," Mary ordered. "You need strength." Isabella discovered she was ravenous. As she ate, Mary told her about the ship, a fast brigantine with a crew of 80, most of them former slaves, pressed sailors, or men fleeing various nooses. "They followed Captain Cross with a loyalty that bordered on worship," Mary explained, "because he'd given them something most pirates never had, a code of honor." "No rape," Mary said flatly. "No torture, no preying on fishing boats or poor merchant vessels. Cross targets only military ships and the wealthy traders who profit from the slave trade. He's made enemies of every navy and merchant house in the Caribbean, but his crew would die for him." "And me?" Isabella asked quietly. "What happens to me?" Mary met her eyes. "That depends on what you want to happen." Before Isabella could respond, the cabin door opened again, and Nathaniel Cross entered. He seemed larger in the confined space, his presence filling every corner. He'd shed the long coat, wearing only a loose shirt, breeches, and boots. The setting sun through the windows painted him in shades of gold and shadow. "You're awake," he observed. "Good." Mary stood, gathering her supplies. "I'll check on you in the morning," she said to Isabella, then to Nathaniel. "Be gentle. She's still healing." When they were alone, Nathaniel pulled a chair close to the bed, not close enough to threaten, but near enough to speak without shouting. For a long moment he simply studied her, and Isabella found herself unable to look away from those storm-grey eyes. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why save me? Would you have preferred I left you there?" "I would prefer an honest answer. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Fair enough." He leaned back, the chair creaking. "I knew your captain, Marcus Bellingham." Isabella's breath caught. We served together years ago before I turned pirate, Nathaniel continued, his voice carefully neutral. He was a coward then, willing to let others take the blame for his mistakes. I see that hasn't changed. His jaw tightened. When I heard him denying your child, denying you, standing on that balcony like a righteous judge while you were whipped for his pleasure, I decided he'd gotten away with cowardice long enough. So I'm what? Revenge against him? You're a woman who deserved better than she got. Nathaniel stood, moving to the window. When we reach Tortuga, you'll have choices. I have connections there, people who can give you a new identity, passage to another colony, money to start over. Or if you prefer, you can stay with the crew. We need people who can read, write, keep accounts. Mary says you have education. You're offering me a life as a pirate. He turned back to her, and his expression was unreadable. I'm offering you freedom. What you do with it is your choice. Isabella's hands trembled. Freedom. The word felt foreign, impossible. For months she'd been trapped, first by her love for Marcus, then by her pregnancy, then by shame and imprisonment. Now this pirate, this dangerous man who should terrify her, was offering her something no one else had, agency over her own fate. My son, she whispered. They took my son. Nathaniel's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I know, and I'm sorry. If there was a way to get him back without starting a war that would cost innocent lives, I would do it. But they've taken him too far inland, to a place even I can't reach. The tears came then, hot and bitter. Isabella turned her face away, not wanting him to see her break. But she heard him move, felt his weight settle on the edge of the bed. A calloused hand touched her shoulder, not demanding, not possessive, just there. You survived, he said quietly. That takes more strength than most will ever know. Don't let them take that from you too. Chapter 3. Storm and Revelation. Tortuga rose from the Caribbean like a jewel carved from emerald and sapphire. The harbour teemed with ships of every description, merchant vessels alongside pirate sloops, Royal Navy deserters sharing dock space with Spanish traders who asked no questions. It was a place where laws mattered less than gold, and reputation less than the sharpness of one's blade. Isabella stood at the rail of the Serpent's Revenge, watching the chaotic port approach. 2 weeks had passed since Port Royal. 2 weeks of learning to move with the ship's rhythm, of eating at the crew's table and hearing their stories, of slowly rebuilding herself from the shattered pieces Marcus Bellingham had left behind. And 2 weeks of watching Nathaniel cross. He was nothing like Marcus. Where the naval captain had been charming and smooth, Nathaniel was rough and direct. Where Marcus had made promises like prayers, Nathaniel said nothing he didn't mean. He commanded his crew with a mixture of respect and iron discipline, and Isabella had never once heard him raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, people listened. She'd also discovered that he was educated. His cabin held more books than some libraries, and she'd caught him reading philosophy by candlelight when he thought no one was watching. He spoke 3 languages fluently and could navigate by stars alone. He was a contradiction, brutal when necessary, gentle when it mattered, carrying wounds deeper than any blade could make. You're staring. Isabella startled. Mary had appeared beside her, the older woman's knowing smile both amused and sympathetic. I was thinking, Isabella corrected, about a certain captain, I'd wager. Mary leaned against the rail. He's thinking about you too, you know. Hasn't taken his eyes off you since you started coming on deck. Isabella's cheeks warmed. He's just making sure I'm healing. Oh, child. Mary laughed softly. I've sailed with Nathaniel Cross for 5 years. I've seen him face down warships without flinching, fight off boarding parties while half dead from fever, and make grown men weep with fear. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Before Isabella could respond, shouts erupted from the crow's nest. Sail ho, Navy frigate bearing northwest. The deck exploded into controlled chaos. Sailors raced to their stations, while Nathaniel barked orders, his voice cutting through the confusion like a church bell. Isabella watched him transform from the thoughtful man she'd come to know into the legendary pirate captain, decisive, fearless, utterly in command. Mary, get her below, Nathaniel ordered. without taking his eyes off the approaching ship. "I can help," Isabella protested. Nathaniel finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Not with this, please." The please decided it. Isabella let Mary lead her below, though every instinct screamed to stay on deck. As they descended into the ship's belly, she heard the first cannon fire, a warning shot that made the Serpent's Revenge shudder. The next hours were torture. Isabella huddled in Nathaniel's cabin with Mary and two other non-combatants while the battle raged above. The roar of cannons, the screams of men, the splintering of wood, each sound painted terrible pictures in her mind. She thought of Nathaniel on that deck, facing naval guns, and realized with startling clarity that she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. When had that happened? When had the pirate captain who'd saved her become more than just her rescuer? When had his rare smiles become precious, his presence comforting, his voice the thing she listened for in every crowd? The silence, when it came, was somehow worse than the noise. Mary squeezed her hand. "Either we've won or—" She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Footsteps pounded down the ladder and the door burst open. A young sailor, Tom, Isabella had learned his name, grinned at them. "We took her! The frigate's ours, and we've only 3 men wounded." Relief flooded through Isabella like rum. She followed Mary on deck, blinking in the bright sunlight. The naval frigate floated beside them, its sails in tatters, but its crew already working under the watchful eyes of pirate guards. Nathaniel stood near the helm, blood on his shirt, not his own, Isabella hoped, directing the transfer of supplies. He saw her, and something in his expression shifted. Without a word to the men around him, he crossed the deck. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Isabella saw in his eyes what Mary had told her was true. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the gash on his forearm. "It's nothing. Let me clean it, please." That word again, offered back to him like a gift. He nodded and followed her to his cabin. Isabella's hand shook as she gathered water and cloth, not from fear but from the intensity of what she was feeling. When she touched his arm to clean the wound, she felt him tense. "Isabella." Her name on his lips was almost a prayer. "If this isn't what you want." She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd become her salvation. "What if it is? What if I want to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this, you, feels like home?" Nathaniel's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known she'd shed. "Then I would tell you that you've already claimed me, that from the moment I saw you at that whipping post, something in me recognized something in you, that every day since I've been falling deeper and I don't know how to stop." "Then don't," Isabella whispered. He kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and had finally found air. Tender despite his reputation, passionate despite his control, it was a kiss that promised everything words couldn't express. Isabella melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, feeling the solid reality of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I can't give you the life you should have had," he said quietly. "No mansion, no society, no safety. I don't want that life. That life took my son and whipped me in the town square." Isabella's voice was fierce. "I want this life, this ship, this crew who treats me with more respect than any lord ever did. You." Chapter 4. The Price of Freedom. 3 months later, the Serpent's Revenge anchored in a hidden cove off the coast of Jamaica. The moon hung full and bright, turning the water to liquid silver. On the beach, the crew had built a massive bonfire that painted the palm trees in dancing orange light. Isabella stood at the water's edge, watching the celebrations. They'd taken 2 more ships in the past weeks, both Spanish slavers, both carrying human cargo that Nathaniel had freed, and offered passage to Tortuga, or any other port they chose. The crew was rich, drunk, and joyful. Having second thoughts? She smiled as Nathaniel approached, his footsteps soft on the sand. He'd become her compass, her anchor in this wild new world. They'd grown closer with each passing day, learning each other's wounds and scars, building something neither had expected to find. "Never," she said, "though I still can't believe you told the crew." "They deserve to know their quartermaster is also the captain's woman." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth. "Besides, they adore you. Half of them would mutiny if I ever wronged you." It was true. Isabella had found her place among the pirates, keeping accounts, teaching letters to those who wanted to learn, even helping Mary with the wounded. She was no longer the ruined merchant's daughter or the discarded mistress. She was Isabella Cross, and the name carried weight in these waters. "There's something I need to tell you," Nathaniel said, and his tone made her turn in his arms. His expression was serious. "We intercepted a letter from Port Royal. Marcus Bellingham is being transferred to England. He's been recalled due to certain irregularities in his conduct." Isabella's heart clenched. "My son." The letter mentioned a child sent to the Sisters of Mercy convent in Port Royal itself, not inland. "Isabella, if that's true, if they lied about taking him far away, we might be able to get him back." Hope, dangerous and brilliant, flared in her chest. "How?" "A raid. Small, surgical. In and out before the Navy knows we're there." Nathaniel's hands tightened on her shoulders. "But it's risky. If we're caught, my crew dies, and you might lose everything again." Isabella thought of her infant son. Barely a month old when they'd torn him away. She'd carried him inside her body, felt him grow, held him for only hours before he was gone. The pain of that loss had never truly healed. She'd only learned to live with it, like learning to breathe with broken ribs. "When do we leave?" Nathaniel's smile was fierce and proud. 3 days. We'll need to gather intelligence first, scout the convent's defenses. But Isabella, even if we succeed, this changes things. The Navy will hunt us harder. Every port will become dangerous. Then we'll be dangerous right back." Isabella stood on her toes to kiss him, pouring into it all her gratitude, all her love, all her determination. "You gave me back my life. Let me have a chance at being a mother again." The raid on Port Royal was executed with military precision. While the town slept, the Serpent's Revenge crew moved through shadows like ghosts. Nathaniel had planned every detail, every contingency. Isabella waited with Mary and 10 armed sailors at the convent's garden wall, her heart threatening to beat out of her chest. When the nun emerged carrying a bundle that squirmed and mewed softly, Isabella's vision blurred with tears, her son bigger now but unmistakably hers. The nun, bribed with enough gold to ease her conscience, said nothing as she placed the infant in Isabella's arms. "His name is Thomas," the nun whispered. "We've been calling him Thomas." Isabella looked down at her son, at Thomas, and felt something inside her that had been broken finally begin to heal. He had her dark hair and Marcus's blue eyes, but he was his own person, innocent of all the sins that had brought him into this world. "We need to move," one of the sailors hissed. They ran through Port Royal's streets, Thomas bundled against Isabella's chest, the crew forming a protective circle around them. Behind them, alarm bells began to ring. They'd been discovered. The final sprint to the longboats was chaos, gunfire echoing across the harbor, shouts in English and Spanish, the crew returning fire to cover their escape. Isabella clutched Thomas and ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, Nathaniel beside her, his pistol barking as he took down a pursuing soldier. They reached the boats. Sailors pushed them into the water, oars slapping waves as they raced toward the Serpent's Revenge. Behind them, Port Royal burned with torchlight, and Isabella knew they could never return. But as they climbed aboard the ship, and Nathaniel shouted orders to catch the wind, as Thomas wailed in her arms and the crew cheered their successful escape, Isabella realized she didn't care. She had her son. She had her freedom. She had a man who'd risked everything to give her back what had been stolen. Later, as dawn painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, Isabella stood at the bow with Thomas in her arms and Nathaniel beside her. The Serpent's Revenge cut through calm waters, heading for the open ocean where no navy could follow, where they could raise her son to be free. "Thank you," she whispered, not for the first time and not for the last. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved yourself, Isabella. I just showed you the door." She smiled, watching the sun rise on her new life, dangerous, uncertain, but entirely her own. From whipped and shamed in a town square to pirate quartermaster and mother, she'd been transformed by fire and salt water. And standing here, with her son in her arms and her love beside her, Isabella knew she would never go back to what she'd been. Freedom, she'd learned, was worth any price. And love, real love, built on respect and shared courage, was the greatest treasure the Caribbean had ever held.